Hello everyone and welcome to my channel Code with Hafiz. My name is Hafizullah Masoudi, and in this video I'm going to show you the CRUD operations on dynamic input form fields using Laravel 9 and Vue JS 3 for your single page applications. The features would be like this demo as you can see right now, and we will build or start building from this button, and if we click on this you can see you can add multiple or dynamic input fields at the same time, which will be subtasks for a specific task, and they have a nice validation also, and their validation is also, you can see, is dynamic. If we fill out of an input and submit, you can see it validates only that input. And after we do this, we will also do the edit, because if you click on edit you can see you can edit a single subtask also. And we will also work on delete, which you can delete a subtask. If we you can see it deleted the task. And then we will work on this mark as complete, and we will also create a mark as incomplete button too. So guys, these are all the functionalities that we will build throughout this video. So before starting the tutorial guys, I want to point out that if you find the content of this video useful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and a nice comment also. And if you are new to this channel, smash the subscribe button if you want more videos like this. So let's start the tutorial guys. So the project that I'm going to use for this tutorial is from one of my previous tutorials which I did on a to-do single page application, where you can create some tasks and you can edit each of the tasks or delete each of the tasks. Well, we will start working from this project, and if you want to know how I created this to-do application, you can check out that tutorial also. So please refer to the description of this video and find the link there. And if you want to just see how I did the CRUD operations on dynamic input form fields, please continue with me in this tutorial to find out how I did it. Now let's start implementing the functionalities, starting from the create function. Well, suppose we want subtasks or multiple subtasks for each of these tasks. So for that reason, first of all, we have to create a model and also a migration for our subtasks, and also a controller for the subtasks. Or we don't need a controller guys, we will code our subtasks also in the tasks controller. So what I will do is open a terminal here and head to the project directory, and don't worry, I have provided the GitHub link to this project also in the video description, and you can find the source code of this to-do application also there. So let's head to the project directory. So cd/opt/lamp and then /htdocs and then to-do app. And to create a model with a migration, we can run a command which will be php artisan make : model, and to name the model, let's say subtask. And to create a migration also, we can pass a flag, so -m, and then press enter. Now let's open the project in the Visual Studio Code. So code space dot. So the first thing that I want to do is create the relationship between the tasks and the subtasks. So let's go to app models and let's open task model and also subtask model. Well, first of all, let's copy this fillable fields from here, because in subtasks we will also have some fillable fields. Let's paste it here, and first let's create the relationship of task to the subtask. So let's press enter here, and let's say public function, and a task could have multiple subtasks, so we can name this function subtasks. And inside this function we will return $this arrow, the relationship of task with the subtask. So a task could have or has many subtasks, so we can use has many. So app / models and then the model names, which will be subtask. Now let's go to the subtask model, and in here first of all let's edit the fillable fields. Well, we want the title, so let's leave it, but before that we need a task ID, because each of the subtasks should be linked according to this task ID to the tasks, so that's necessary. And we need a title, we also need the detail, and let's say we want a start date, and let's say we want another one for the end date, and I think that's enough for this tutorial. Now for the relationship, let's say public function, and each subtask belongs to a single task, so let's say task, and in here let's return the relationship, so return $ this arrow has one app / models / task. Now I think this is enough for the models, so let's close them, and now let's create the fields for our subtask table. So we can go to the migration, let's go to database migrations and open the last one, and in here what I will do is duplicate this one. So first one is for the task ID, which will be integer, and the name should be task ID. The next one is a string, which will be title, and the next one is text, which will be detail, and the next one is also a string, which will be start date, and the last one is also a string, which will be the end date. Now this being done, we can run the migration and create this table. So to run the migrations, let's open the terminal here and let's run php artisan migrate and press enter. Well, it's throwing an error and it says base table tasks already exists. Well, let's run it fresh, so let's say php artisan migrate fresh, and yeah, our table has been created. Now this being done, we can also close the migration file, and now we will start working on creating the tasks or subtasks functionality. So before everything, let's go to the app and HTTP controllers and task controller, and where we are getting our all tasks, we also want to get the subtasks alongside with each of the tasks. So in here we can pass a with function, and we want the sub_tasks. And if we save the file now and get back to the browser and refresh, let's open the terminal here, or let's create another task. So let's create task number 1, and let's select the time, let's say some text for task number 1, and let's create it. And if we inspect, well, I don't have the Vue dev tools, so let's go to the Chrome store. So Chrome store, and let's go to this link and let's search for Vue, and we want to install this one, so let's install it, add it to Chrome. So it has been installed successfully, and let's close it now, and let's close the terminal here also and refresh again, and now let's open the inspect element again, and now you can see we have this Vue tab in here. So let's click on this, let's skip this and click on the task component, and in here you can see we have this tasks array, which are all of our tasks, and if we click on this, we have this single task, and you can see now where we have this property of subtasks. For now it is 0 because we don't have any related subtasks to this task. So whenever we create a subtask for this task, we will have it available in here. Now the next part is, guys, to create a button for our subtasks. So let's go to the text editor. So let's go to the Visual Studio Code, and in here what I will do is scroll down a little bit here, and let's go to resources, JS, components, and task component. Well, let's close the sidebar for now. So let's scroll to the top, and we want to create the button in this table. Well, first of all, let's also create a field for the subtasks count. So let's press enter here and create a th, and let's say subtasks count, and let's duplicate it. This one should be, let's say, subtasks. And after this detail, let's create a td, and let's say double curly braces, and we have now available or access to the subtasks property, so we can use that. So let's say task dot sub underscore tasks, and then dot length to get the count. And let's create another td, and inside this td we will create a button. So let's create a button, and for the text of the button, let's say subtasks, and let's also give the class. So btn dash info, and let's say btn dash sm for small. Well, to get the changes we have to run yarn run watch. So let's open the terminal again, and let's say yarn run watch. So this being done, guys, we can close the terminal again, and let's get back to the text editor or browser, and let's refresh. And now you can see we have our counts, and we have the subtasks also. Well, for the counts, guys, let's do something else also, because for now it looks a little bit ugly. So what I will do is cut it from here, and I will create a span tag here, and inside the span tag let's paste it, and let's say subtasks here, and let's also give this span tag a class. Well, I will bind this class to Vue objects, and we will use template literals, and let's say batch, and then $, curly braces, and then we want to check for the subtasks length. So let's copy this and paste it here, and question mark, and we want to check if the length is equal to 0, and if it is equal to 0, then we want to give this span tag a background of, let's say, dark, and or not dark, guys, let's say we want this one to be warning, and if it is greater than 0, then we want the background to be success. And let's also declare another class at the end which will be text dark. Now let's save it, and let's get back to the browser, refresh, and yeah, now it looks much better. Now for this button, guys, what we will do is assign it to a function, and with that function we will open another model, and in that model we will put our subtasks data. So let's get back to the text editor, and for the button, let's say at click we want to say show subtasks, and we want to pass the task variable, so task in the parentheses. Now let's create this show subtasks function. So let's scroll down, and let's create it at the bottom. So let's create it here. Let's say show subtasks, and we have the task variable also. And inside here what I will do is, first of all, let's say this dot Or before writing any code here, guys, let's create the objects in our data field first for you to understand better and don't get confused. So let's go to the data field. Yeah, in here first of all we want to create another edit mode. So let's say sub edit mode, which will be false by default, and let's create at the bottom let's say subtask data. So subtasks data or subtask datas, and it will be an array, and we also want the errors array, so subtask errors, and this should be also an array. And then we have an object or an array of all the subtasks. So let's say subtasks. Well, this one should be an object. Now I think that's enough. Let's get back to our function, and in this function first of all let's say this dot sub edit mode, and we want to make it to false. So let's say false here, or we don't have a comma here. And after that let's say this dot subtasks should equal to the tasks that is coming throughout this function, and then dot subtasks. And then we want to create the subtask datas fields. So let's say this dot subtask data, because for now if you check it, or remember, we have this empty array for both for the data and also for the errors. Now in the function we want to assign some fields to these arrays. So let's scroll down, and let's say this should be equal to array and then an object, and inside this object we will have an ID which will be empty, and we will have a task ID which will equal to task.id, and we will have a title which will be empty also, and next one is detail which will be also empty, and let's say start date which will be also empty, and the final one is end date. So let's say end underscore date. Now this is for the data. Let's create the errors also. So this dot subtask errors should equal to, let's say for example array and then an object, and inside this object let's say we want to validate the title which will be false by default, and the start date which will be also false, and the end date which will be also false. And finally we want to open a model for the subtasks. So $ parenthesis quotation and then ID subtask model, and we want to say dot model and then show. Now the next part is, guys, to create this subtask model, and because we already have a model for our tasks, so we can use that. So let's minimize it and let's duplicate it. Well, this one should be, let's say, task model, and this one should be subtask model. So for the name of the model, let's say subtask model, or for the ID of the model, and let's also paste it for the labels. So let's paste it in here also. Now for the fields, what I will do is delete all the fields because we don't need them, and we will create our own fields. And let's also remove this extra footer from here, and let's remove this delete mode, and let's remove this button also and leave the close button. And for the title of the model, what I will do is remove this extra title, and instead of delete task I will say subtasks. Let's remove the if or this vshow also, and I think that's good. So let's get back to the browser, refresh, and check our model if it works. So let's click on this. Yeah, you can see now we have our empty model. So the next part is, guys, to create the input fields for submitting a subtasks data. So let's head back to the text editor, Visual Studio Code, and in here, guys, well, for the size of the model you can see we have left this condition and we don't need this, so let's remove it, and let's say model hyphen LG for a large model, and we have this model dialog which looks good but is throwing error. Well, let's remove the binding also because we don't need it. Yeah, it looks nice now. So to create the input fields, we will loop for the input fields, because for now if we scroll down and you can see our subtasks data is an array, and in this array when we open the model, if I scroll down, yeah, this is the opening model function. You can see we are pushing or creating this object in this array which is only one object, so we have to loop for it, because for dynamic fields suppose we have two objects, so for that reason we must use loops. So let's scroll to the top, and in here what I will do is create a row, and let's also give it some other classes of margin, so empty for margin top -3, and another class, let's also say mb for bottom margin, which will be also 3. And what I will do is loop for this row, so let's say v-4 and parenthesis n, let's say subtask data, and we also need the key which will be the index, and inside these parentheses let's say subtask data comma index, and inside the row now let's create some call mds, so dot call md-2, and well, this should be 2, and inside this call md let's create a forum group, and inside this forum group let's create a label, and this one should be for title, and let's create an input field, will type should be text, and let's give the class of forum control, and let's also bind it to this subtask data object. So let's say v-model, and in the subtask data object we have a title, and to validate the data let's create a span tag, and let's give it a class of text -danger, and for the text of the for example this validation, let's say title is required, and let's also give it some condition, so v-show, and we want to show this whenever the subtask errors, and we want to check for the index dot title is true, so then we want to show this validation. Now let's duplicate this call md. Well, I will duplicate it, let's suppose 4 times or 3 times more, and the second one should be also, let's say call md3, and for instead of title we need the detail, so let's say detail, and let's say it should be also an input field, and this one should be detail, and let's say detail is required, and this one should be detail. Now the third one is, let's say this one is also called md3, and this one is for the start date. So let's say start date, and instead of type text we want to say this one is date, and let's also say this one is start underscore date. And in here let's also say start date is required, and for the validation condition let's also say start date. Well guys, for the detail I don't want to validate it, so let's remove the validation, but we do need to validate the start date, so let's leave it. And the last one is for the end date, so let's also say in here end underscore date, and the type should be date, and in here let's also say end date. Let's say end date, and this one should be also end date. Now we can get back to the browser and check our code and see how it looks like. So let's get back to the browser and reload, and now let's click on the subtask. You can see we have these data fields. Well, this one should be called md3, so let's get back to the text editor and make this call md3, and let's refresh. Yeah, it looks much better. Well, to show you how this for loop works, if I get back to the text editor and scroll down, and in here what I will do is copy this object. Well, let's cut it and paste it again, and let's indent it a little bit, and let's put a comma here and paste another one, and don't forget to paste a second one for the validation also, because if you don't it will throw an error. So let's paste it in here also. Let's duplicate it and save it, and if we get back to the browser now, refresh and click on it, you can see now we have two fields. So this is how you can do it using the code, but we want to make a way to do this using the user interface. So we will create two buttons here, one for adding these input fields dynamically, and the other one for removing these input fields dynamically. So let's remove these extra input fields from here, and let's scroll to the top, and after this last call md3, let's create another call md of 1, and let's also give it a condition. So v-f, and we want to check for the sub edit mode. So if the sub edit mode is not true, then we want to show this field. So let's say if $sub edit mode is not true, then we want to be able to add input fields or remove them. So inside here let's create a forum group. So forum group, and inside this forum group let's create a row, and let's say call md6, and let's duplicate it, and the first one is, let's say, a button, and inside this button let's give the class of btn dash success and btn dash sm, and let's also give the margin of top 4, and inside the button let's say h6. Well, this one should be h6, and let's say and plus to give it a plus sign. Well, I think that's enough for this one. Well, let's also give it or assign an event to this button. So add click, and we want to add a subtask data. Now let's copy this button, because we are doing the same for the remove. So let's paste it here, and instead of add we want to say remove subtask data, and we want to remove it according to the index of that data, and instead of plus we want to say times for an X mark. Now I think that's enough, and if let's create the functions also. So let's scroll down, and in here let's first of all say add subtask data, and let's duplicate it, and the next one is, let's say, for removing a task. Now for the add subtask data, we want to push an object like this to the subtask data's array, and also an object like this to the subtask errors. So what I can do is copy this object. So let's copy it, and let's scroll down to the add subtask data, and in here let's say this dot subtask data's array dot push, and then we want to push that object. And let's also do it for the errors. So in here let's say this dot subtask errors dot push, and we want to push this object. So let's copy it and paste it here. Now let's also work on the remove function. So in here let's say this dot subtask data's dot to remove an index from an array using JavaScript. We can use the splice function, and then we want to remove that specific index, and we want to only remove one element. So let's duplicate it, and the next one is for subtask errors. Now let's save it, and let's get back to the browser and check our code if it works. So let's click on this, and both are green, so we are getting an error, and it says task is not defined. And if we get back to the text editor, yeah, it is true, but instead of getting task ID like this in here, we can now use the first element of the array. So let's say subtask datas, and we want to use the first element, which is index 0. And let's also change the button color. So let's get back to the forum, and this one should be danger, and let's save it. Let's get back to the browser, refresh, and click on this. Yeah, if we add it, you see it adds an input field, and if we remove it, well, the first one is not removed, and I think there's an error. So let's get back to the text editor, and we are sending the index in here, and if we scroll down to the function, we don't have the index in here. So let's pass the index in the function also. And one thing more, guys, that let's also make our model extra large. So instead of LG, let's say XL for extra large. And while we are already in here, let's also declare a condition for this remove button, because we don't want to show it in our first index. So what we can do is, in here we can say v-if, and we can check for the subtask datas dot length, and we want to check it if it is greater than 1, and we also want to check the index. If the index is also greater than 0, then we want to show this remove button. So let's save it and get back to the browser, refresh, and if we click on this, yeah, now it looks much better. And if we click on this, now you can see it shows the remove button only for the next elements, and we can remove them also. Now this being done, guys, we have to create another button to submit this form and send the data to a Laravel API route, and then we will store the data to the database. So let's get back to the text editor, and let's create it. Well, this one is the closing tag of the row, so let's create another row after this row. and for this row I will say it should be called MD12. And let's create a button here, and for the class of the button let's say btn-info btn-sm for small, and we want to float it to the end, and let's also give it some margin of top too. And let's also say add click, and we want to say add click store sub tasks. Well guys, let's use our subtask edit mode. So in here we can say if subtask or subedit mode is not true or is false, then we want to call the store subtask method. And if the subedit mode is true, then we want to call the update function. So let's say update subtask. Now let's save it, and for the text of the button we also want to check for the subedit mode. So if the subedit mode is not true, we want to say store subtask, and if it is true, then we want to say update subtask. So update subtask. Now let's create this store subtask function. So let's scroll to the down, and after we have this remove function, we can say store subtask and curly braces. And before everything else, we want to validate the data. So because we have an array of validations or validation objects, we must also use a loop in here. So we can use a for loop in here too. So let's say for let I equals to 0 and I is less than this dot subtask datas dot length and I plus plus, and inside here let's say this dot subtask datas, and let's say we want to pass the I dot title because we want to check for the each of the titles. So if it is equal to an empty string, then we want the validation of that specific title to be true. So this dot subtask errors, and then we want to pass the I, and then the title should be true. And if the title is not empty, then we want to this validation to be false. So let's make it false. Let's duplicate it 2 times more, and the next one is for start date, and this one should be also start date, this one should be also start date, and this one is for the end date. So let's copy it and paste it here also. And now if we check our validation, so let's get back to the browser, refresh, and if we click on this submit, you can see it's being validated. And if we click on another one and validate, you can see it validates. And if we fill one of the fields and submit again, now you see the other parts are being validated. So this is the validation part. Now the next part is, guys, that we also have to find a way to check for all the validations if they are false. So we can use another function of JavaScript, which is every function. So let's say this dot subtasks data, and then we want to check every field available in this array. So in here we can say dot every, and it should take a function which will take a subtask, and it should equal to curly braces, and then in here we want to return subtask dot title, and then subtask dot start date, and the last one is subtask dot end date. Well, this one should be also 2 ands, and let's store it in a variable. So const result should equal to this function. And then let's check for this result. So if the result is true, then we want to submit the data through Axios request. So in here what we can do is, well, let's call our page loader first. So window.emitter, and if you want to check out how we added this emitter and how the page loader, I have provided the video tutorial links in the description of this video. You can find it there and check out those tutorials also. So window.emitter.emit, and then our loader status, and we want to make it true. And then we want to create another variable by the name of t, and we want to assign the this keyword to this. Now let's set our timeout. So set timeout, and it will take a function, then curly braces, and inside this function let's say Axios. Well guys, we have an error here, and this should be a comma in here. So Axios.post, and then window.url plus API/store subtask, and we want to send the data also. So t.subtask data, and dot then response should equal to curly braces, and we want to get all the tasks from the database. So t.get tasks, and we also want to make false the loader. So let's duplicate it, and this time we want to make it false. And let's also catch some errors. So catch errors should equal to curly braces, and let's duplicate our loader because we also want to make the loader false in our catch after we get some errors, and we also want to console log the errors. And let's also give some time to this set timeout, so I will make it half a second, and I think we are good to go and make this API route. So let's go to the sidebar and let's go to routes api.php, and in here what I will do is duplicate this store task method, and let's say this one should be for store subtask, and this one should be also store subtask. Now let's go to the task controller and create this method. So let's scroll to the top, and we also already have opened the task controller. So let's go to task controller, and at the bottom I will say public function store subtask, and we have our request $request. And before doing anything or writing any code in here, let's import our subtask model. So let's duplicate this one, and let's say subtask model. Now to store the subtasks, first of all let's get all the subtasks from the request variable and store it in a variable. So let's create a variable by the name of subtasks, which will be equal to request arrow all, and then let's loop for each of them. So for each $subtasks as $subtask, and in here we want to call our model. So subtask : then create, which will take an array, and we have first of all the task ID, which will be equal to, let's say, our $subtask variable, then brackets, and then task ID, and then we have the title, which will be also equal to subtask variable title, and then we have the detail, which should be equal to also subtask variable and then detail. Well, this one should be comma, and then we have the start date, which should be equal to $subtask start date. And finally we have the end date, which should be also equal to subtask variable end date. And after we create each of the subtasks, then we want to return a response. So return response JSON, and we want to return a success message. Now I think we are good to go, and let's try our code if it submits the data and saves our subtasks. So let's get back to the browser and let's refresh, and let's click on subtasks. Let's add two subtasks. So let's say subtask number 1, subtask number 1. Let's select the date for it, and let's say subtask number 2, subtask number 2. Let's select the date for it, and let's say store subtask. Well, it's not working. Let's see what is the problem. And it says end date doesn't have a default value. And if we get back to the text editor, let's open our model. So let's go to models, Subtask Model, and in here you can see we are saying in here end start. Well, this should be end date. So let's save it. Let's get back to the browser and submit the data again, and we have another error, and it says task ID cannot be null. Well, let's do some debugging, guys. So what I will do is go to the task component, and in here I will console log. So console log response dot data, and after console logging the data, let's go to the task controller, and instead of storing this to variable, let's return it. So let's say return request all, and now let's get back to the browser, refresh. Let's try to submit another task. So subtask number 1, subtask number 1. Let's select the date. Subtask number 2, subtask number 2, and let's store subtask. And if we check out, you can see this task ID for the first element is correct, but we are not getting the second one. So let's check out our code. What is the problem? So let's get back to the text editor, and let's go to task component, and let's go to the add subtask data, and you can see in here we are getting the first element of the array, but we don't want the ID, we want the task ID field. So task underscore ID, and now I think we should be good to go. So let's refresh again, and let's try to submit this time, and hopefully it will be successful. Well, let's remove the return also. So let's go to task controller, and let's say Control Z and save the file. Well, we don't need the refresh. So let's say subtask number 1, subtask number 1, and let's select the date. Let's put another field, subtask number 2, subtask number 2, and let's also select the dates, and now let's say store subtask, and you can see it returned the success message. And if we go to the phpMyAdmin, so localhost phpMyAdmin, and go to to-do app subtasks, you can see now we have these three subtasks, and I think the first one is from our previous code. So let's delete it. So let's delete the first one, because these are the twos that we created earlier. So guys, this was how to create dynamic fields and how to store them in the database. Now the next part is to, first of all, after we store the data, we want this input fields to be emptied again. and we also want to hide the model. So let's get back to the text editor and let's go to task component, and in here, after we get the tasks, let's remove the console. After we get the tasks, we want to close the model, so $, parenthesis, and then Subtask Model, and then dot model, and we want to hide it. Now let's get back to the browser and refresh, and now you can see we have these two subtasks, and if we submit another one, let's say subtask number 3, and select a date for it, let's submit it, and you can see model closed and it has been updated. Now the next part is, guys, to fetch all the subtasks and create a table at the top of this model and show all the subtasks. So let's get back to the text editor and scroll to the top where our model is located. So let's scroll, and yeah, well, we want to show the table before this input fields. So let's press enter here, and we can get all the subtasks from our task variable, because if we scroll down to the show function, well, where is our show function? Yeah, you can see we are assigning this subtask object all the subtasks from this task variable, so we can get the subtasks from here. So let's look for the subtasks. So let's get back to the model, and in here what I will do is create a table responsive div. So table responsive, and inside here let's create a table, and let's also give it another class of table bordered, and let's also give it a class of table hyphen hover, and let's also give it another class of text hyphen center. And let's create the table, and inside here let's create the t-head, and let's create the tr, and we will have some ts. First one is for the count, let's duplicate it. Next one is for the title, and next one is, let's say, for the detail, and the next one is, let's say, for the status of the task, because we want to show if a subtask is completed or incomplete. And the next one is for the, let's say, start date, and this one is for the end date, and the last one is for actions. Now let's create our t-body. Inside here we will also have a tr for which we will loop. So let's say v-4 parenthesis in sub underscore tasks, and in here let's say subtask comma index, and we also want the key which will be index. Now let's create the tds. First one is for the index, so index +1 to start counting from 1. Let's duplicate it. The second one is for, let's say, sub underscore task dot title, and let's copy it, let's paste it here. This one is for detail, and for the status what I will do is remove this entire object, and let's press enter, and let's create a span tag first, and let's give this span tag a class which will be binded to Vue object, and in here we will use our template literals, and we want, well, first of all let's declare a class of batch, then we want to check for the task status, so $, curly braces, and then task dot status, and then we want to say if the status is 0, we want the background to be danger, and the other way we want it to be success, so bg hyphen success. and inside the span tag let's put double curly braces, and let's check for the status again. If it is 0, then we want to say incomplete, and if it is 1, then we want to say completed. So let's say incompleted. Now for the start date, let's paste the code and let's say start date, and let's do it for the end date also. So this one should be end underscore date. Let's also create another TD for our actions. And now if we get back to the browser, refresh, we should be able to get our tasks. Will we have an error? And it says status undefined. If we go to the browser, well, we don't have a status field, guys. So let's create it, guys. Let's go to the structure and let's create it after the detail. So let's say status, which should be a boolean, and let's say default should be as defined 0, and let's also add it to the migration. So let's go to the migrations and add it here too. So in here let's say status, and this should be boolean, and let's say default should be 0, and let's also add it to the model. So let's go to the Subtask Model and let's add it in here also. So status. Now let's close the model, let's close the sidebar also and save it. And if we get back to the browser now, refresh, click on this, well, we are still getting the error. Well, let's hard reload and click, yeah, we still get the error. Well, we have our status, guys, and it is 0, so it should work. Well, let's check our code, and guys, this should be task, subtask, not task. So let's paste it here, save it again, refresh and click on it. Yeah, now we are getting everything, but our table is not working. So let's see what is the problem. And yeah, in here we forgot to add a table class. Now let's refresh and click on it. Yeah, now it looks much better. Now that we are getting our data, our read functionality is also finished, guys. Now the next part is to add the update functionality. So let's get back to the text editor and just scroll down to this final TD, and in here I will create a button, and let's also assign a class for it, which will be btn-primary and btn-sm, and let's also give some margin of x to this button, which will be 1. And for the text of the button, let's say edit, and let's also assign an @click event, which will be edit subtask, and we want to pass the subtask variable also. So let's create this edit subtask function, guys. Let's scroll to the down, and in here let's say edit subtask, which will take a subtask, and we will do the same as we did for the store with some minor changes. So let's scroll and let's copy these objects from here. So let's copy them and paste it here. And for the sub edit mode, we want it to be true. So let's say this one is true, and we don't want to assign the subtasks, so let's remove them. And for the object, we want to assign the data that we are getting in here. So let's say subtask.id, and for this one let's also say subtask dot task ID, and for the title let's say subtask dot title, and this one should be subtask underscore or dot detail, and this one should be sub underscore task dot start date, and this one should be sub underscore task dot end date. Now let's save it and let's get back to the browser, refresh, and let's click on this. And if we click on one of the tasks, you can see it fills out the forum data, and the dynamic input buttons are also gone, because in edit we want to edit each of the subtasks separately, so we don't need to add dynamic fields. And if you click on the other one, well, the data for each of them is the same, so we are not seeing any changes here, and that's alright. Now let's create or in here you can see we are getting the update subtask button also, because if we click on this you can see it says store, but whenever we click on this it changes to the update. So now let's work on this update subtask. So let's create the update subtask function, and in here what I will do is copy everything from the store function. So let's copy the validation and the Axios function also. So let's paste it here, and the validation is okay, and the subtasks every function is also okay, but for the result and Axios request, in here we want to say update subtask, and we also want to pass the ID, so slash plus t dot subtask datas, and we want the first element because we only have a first element, so let's say bracket 0, and then we want the task, or not the task, the ID itself, which will be the ID of the subtask. Now let's save it, and for the then function what I want to do is remove these two lines of code, or we want to get the tasks, but I don't want to hide the model, but instead what I want to do is I want to say t dot subtasks should equal to response, so response dot data, which will come from the function, and the loader status is false. Yeah. Now let's also add a finally function, so finally in here, which will take another function, and it should equal to curly braces, and in here what I want to do is make false the sub edit mode, so t dot sub edit mode should equal to false, and then I want to say t dot sub task datas should equal to, let's say, the object that we have in our show function. So let's scroll, well, let's copy this one, so let's copy it, or this is for the update, we want an empty object, so let's copy this object and let's put our brackets and paste it. Well, let's indent it a little bit, and for the task ID it looks good, but this should be t, and let's also put our validation, so let's say t dot sub task errors should equal to brackets, and let's copy the validations object also, so we can copy this one and paste it here. Well, let's also indent it a little bit. Now this being done, guys, we have to create the update task route, so let's go to the api.php and let's duplicate this one, paste it, and paste it for this one also, but we do have an ID, so slash curly braces ID. Now let's create this function in the task controller, so let's go to task controller, and we can duplicate this store subtask, so let's duplicate it, and let's pass the ID first in here. So ID, and for the name of the function, let's say update subtask. Now the next part is, guys, to after we get all the subtasks, let's say $task underscore ID, and it should be an empty variable, and inside here everything looks great, but we don't want to create a subtask. Instead we want to update. So first of all, let's check for the ID. So where ID is equal to ID, then let's say arrow update, and we want to update it, and then let's say $task underscore ID should equal to $subtask, and we want to get the task ID. And we are getting this task ID because we want, after we update the subtask, we want to get all the subtasks again from the database and send it in this response JSON. So let's say $sub underscore tasks should equal to Subtask Model colon where task ID is equal to $task ID, and then we want to say get all the subtasks. And instead of this success message, this time we want to send the subtasks array, because if we get back to the component, you can see we are assigning this response data that is coming from this post request, and we are assigning this data to the subtasks array to update the subtasks. Now I think we are good to go and check our code if it works. So let's get back to the text editor and let's refresh. Let's click on subtasks and let's edit this first one. So in here I will say update it, and let's submit it, and you can see it updated right away the task. So our edit functionality is also finished. Now is the time to create the delete functionality. So let's get back to the text editor, and in here let's scroll to the model, because we want to create a delete button. And yeah, after this edit button, let's duplicate it, and this one should be danger, and instead of edit subtask we want to say, let's say delete subtask, and we want to pass the subtask variable also. And for the text of the button, let's say delete. Now let's create this function. So let's scroll to the down, and after this function let's paste it, and we have our subtask. And inside here we want to check or confirm if the user really wants to delete the subtask. So let's say if confirm, which is a JavaScript function, and let's say are you sure you want to delete this subtask. And if user clicks on OK, then we want to call the Axios function, and if it clicks on the cancel, so this code inside this if statement will not run. So in here what we can do is copy the Axios function from the update also. So let's copy this Axios function, well, let's also copy the loader. Let's copy everything and paste it here, but we don't need the finally function, so let's remove it. And catch looks great, and in here we also want to assign this subtasks to the response data, and we also want to get the tasks. And instead of update subtask, let's say we want to delete a subtask, and instead of this t subtask 0 ID, this time we want to say, let's say subtask dot id, because we have the subtask in our function coming, and I think that looks good. So let's copy this delete subtask and create the route. So let's duplicate this one and paste it instead. Now the next part is to create this function in the task controller. So let's go to task controller. So in here let's create the function first. Let's press enter here, public function delete subtask, and we have id coming, and in here let's say $sub underscore task should equal to subtask colon colon find the id, and then let's say subtask and then colon colon where id is equal to id, and then we want to say delete, and after we delete we want to get all the subtasks again from the database. So $subtasks should equal to subtask colon colon where task id is equal to subtask variable that we got before deleting the task, and we want the task id from it, and then we want to say arrow get, and let's return the response. So let's copy this and paste it here. Now I think this is enough, and let's go to the browser and check our code if it works. So let's click on subtasks and let's try to delete this first one. So let's say OK, and you can see task has been deleted successfully. Now we have finished the delete functionality also, and one thing that I want to show you guys, if we click on this edit button and we fill this form, but we don't want to be able to delete a task while we are editing a task. So to complete or get this result successfully, let's go to the text editor and let's scroll, or first go to the component and go to the delete button, and what I will do is declare a function for this delete button, or a condition for this delete button. So v-f, and I want to check for the sub edit mode, and if it is true then I don't want to show this delete button. So in here we can just say sub edit mode. If it is true, then this delete button won't be showing. So let's get back to the browser and refresh, and if we click on it, well, it's not showing permanently. Or guys, if the edit mode is false, then we want to show it. So we forgot the exclamation mark, so let's put it here, and now if we save it, get back to the browser, refresh, and now you see we are getting the button, but if we click on the edit, the button has been gone, and if we save the task, the button comes again. So this looks much better. Now let's click on, or let's work on our task status functionality, because we want to toggle the task from incomplete to complete, and then from the complete to incomplete. So let's do it, guys. Let's get back to the text editor, and what I will do is create another button here. Well, we can duplicate this one, so let's duplicate this one, but for the button style, let's say success, and the other code is correct, but we don't want the v-f, or we want it, guys, and we want to check for the task status. So let's say subtask dot status, and if the status is equal to 0, then we want to say we want to mark as complete, and we also want to send the subtask. So in here let's also say mark as complete. And let's duplicate this one, but this time let's say the style should be warning, and for this one we want to check if the status of the task is 1. If it is 1, then we want to mark as incomplete. So in here let's also say incomplete. Now let's create these functions. So let's scroll to the down, and in here let's put enter, and let's say mark as complete sub_task, and let's duplicate it, and this one should be for incomplete. And the code I want to put here is the same as we did for the delete. So let's copy it and paste it here, and let's copy the function name because we want this to be the API URL. And for the confirm message, let's say, are you sure you want to mark this subtask as complete? Let's copy this if statement for the mark as incomplete also. Now let's copy this function name and paste it here, and instead of saying mark this subtask as complete, this time we want to say as incomplete. Now the next part is, guys, to create these routes. So let's go to the api.php, and what I will do in here is duplicate this route 2 times, and let's paste it for the first one, which is for the incomplete, and for this one let's also paste it, but let's say mark as complete. Well, let's copy it and paste it here also. Now let's create these functions in the task controller. So let's go to task controller, and let's scroll. Well, let's duplicate this delete. So I will duplicate it 2 times, and the first one is for the mark as complete, and the next one is for the mark as incomplete. So incomplete. So first of all, let's work on this mark as complete. Well, we only want to change this delete function. So instead of delete, we want to say update, and then we have an array, and we want to update the status, and we want to update it to 1 because we are marking as complete, and the other code looks good. So let's copy this line of code from here and paste it for this one also, and in this one we want to update it again to 0. Now I think our code is finished, and if we get back to the browser, refresh and try our code if it works. So let's click on this and let's say OK, and you can see the task has been marked as complete, and if we mark it as incomplete again, it will change to red. Now it was a long video, guys, and this being done, our video has come to an end, and you have learned a lot of things in this tutorial. And you have learned how to create dynamic input fields, you have learned how to validate the dynamic input fields, and you also learned how to store the dynamic input fields data in the database. So I hope you enjoyed watching this video. If so, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and also share it with your friends. If you are new to this channel, don't forget to subscribe also. So thanks for watching, guys. See ya in the next tutorial.